You know, I think I've only ever seen one side of the moon.
Okay. There it is.
I wonder why it doesn't spin like other planets.
This is why. This is why.
You know, I thought that I was done with this video. I was just going to leave it as this artifact of how I started off the series of videos. It was just going to be a jumping off point, really. And if you think I'm using Armoured, Skeptic, and Spirit Science Central as a way to get views, I mean, I can totally understand that. I mean, both videos are over a year old and probably don't get much attention anymore. But I'm still name dropping like it's hot, and that's something, I guess. I am putting this on my alternate channel, which doesn't really get any views at all. So you would think if I were trying to milk the views, I would be putting it on my main channel where all my music is, but I'm not. As a matter of fact, I kind of realize how crazy I kind of sound right now. I'm just glad you guys are out for the ride, and maybe you'll get something out of this about what I believe in. And I'm not trying to push my beliefs on anybody. This is just how I feel right now. So I hope you guys like continuation of my response to Spirit Science Central and Armored Skeptic. The thing is, I've got another answer for another one of the questions posed by Spirit Science Central, which is this.
You know, I think I've only ever seen one side of the moon.
Spirit Science Central ultimately posed this particular question very poorly, which caused many people, including myself and probably Armored Skeptic, to misunderstand what they were asking. What they were getting at, though, is that only one side of the moon faces the Earth no matter where it is in the sky. The fact that the moon only shows us one side and never the other is a mystery that has boggled the mind of scientists for the longest time. But if we look at it through the ideas of the electric universe, not only do we get an answer as to why the moon does what it does, but also a fantastic story about what the moon went through to be as it is. Okay, so I'm going to go over the basic premise of the electric universe right here. In this universe, the gravity is not the main force holding everything together. Instead, we state that the fundamental force responsible for everything around us is the electric force. Gravity and magnetism then are the products of the electric force. Okay, so with gravity, we don't exactly know for sure what it is. Not even Einstein himself has given us proof as to what gravity actually is. That's why his theories of relativity are still just theories, because although we are provided some evidence that Einstein's math was onto something, we still don't have any conclusive proof that Einstein was right. If we did have the needed proof, then they wouldn't be theories, instead they would be principles, facts, or laws. In order to do this right, we have to back up a step and put Einstein away for just a minute. We have to go back to Newton when the force of gravity was just that, a force, and not a curvature in space. If gravity is not what Einstein describes it to be, then what can it be? Well, in atoms and molecules there are protons and there are electrons. Protons are the positively charged parts of atoms at the center. Electrons are the negatively charged parts. When there are an equal number of protons and electrons in a substance, then the electrical charge is cancelled out. It is almost zero. But even though this is so, there is still a positive and negative side to molecules and atoms that form a force that is much weaker but has a positive and negative side to it. We call them dipoles. And while the force exerted by the dipoles is much less than the effect of the electric field, it still plays a vital role in our everyday lives. Water is the greatest dipole of them all, because the residual force that draws the hydrogen atoms of one water molecule to the oxygen atom in another water molecule is the reason why you can drink soda from the straw out of your Slurpee from 7-Eleven, and that really is the least of it. The electric universe believes that all atoms and molecules in this universe have some sort of dipole effect, and like magnets, opposites attract, and likes repel. And the positive side of those dipoles on Earth point directly to the center of the Earth. That includes everything on Earth, from cars to birds to the trees and the atmosphere. And that includes humans too, because the Earth is many times more massive in comparison to us. It aligns our dipoles so they point to the center of the Earth, positive side. And because all of the dipoles are facing to the center of Earth, we end up with a situation where the negative sides of the dipoles facing upwards are facing the positive sides of the dipoles facing downward. And the resulting attraction that is produced by the opposite sides of the dipoles facing each other produces gravity. Now, we absolutely know a ton about magnetism. We even have direct relationships hammered out between magnetism and the electric force, and we use those relationships in ways that affect our daily lives. I mean, almost every single home in the United States is powered by alternating current electric power, and alternating electric power is generated using the fundamentals of magnetism, and magnetism is directly related to the electric force. So this is how electromagnets work. Flowing electricity in a wire causes magnetism, and the wires can be arranged in configurations that we use to control where the north and south poles are in that magnet. Before I go further, relax, you don't need to know any equations for this video, so, just take a breather, but there's a super easy method to determine the direction of the north pole in an electromagnet. And you can do it right now in the comfort of your living room, or wherever you are at. The method is called the right-hand rule. Basically, if you know the direction of the current in a wire that's wrapped around a rod, you can determine the north pole of the magnet by wrapping your fingers in the direction of the current. What results is your thumb ends up pointing in the direction of the north pole. It's that simple. That's all it is. So if you have your wire wrapped around a rod and the current is traveling counterclockwise, your thumb ends up pointing up, which is where the north pole is. But if the current is traveling clockwise in the wire, then you will wrap your fingers to find your thumb pointing down. And in this case, the north pole is facing down. Now, if you pull back and take a look at the planets, you can actually notice that you can apply the right-hand rule to the motion of the planets, and your thumb will point north pole every time. Let's take a look at the Earth, right? See, the Earth rotates counterclockwise. That's why the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. So, if you apply the right-hand rule to the rotation motion of the Earth, your thumb ends up pointing up, which is where the North Pole is. I mean, it's not just Earth that you can apply the right-hand rule to. I mean, you can apply it to Saturn, Mercury, Neptune, and Uranus? Oh, yeah, well, I mean, Uranus is kind of on its side, but its planetary motion still indicates where the North Pole is. Just use the right-hand rule, wrap your fingers around the motion, and you'll find out that the North Pole faces kind of to its side. What about Venus? What do you do with Venus? Venus is rotating clockwise, so I can't be right about this right-hand rule thing, right? Doesn't Venus just totally debug me? Well, the right-hand rule applies here too. Just wrap your fingers in the direction of the motion of the rotation, and you will see that the North Pole points in the opposite direction of all the other planets, which is what scientists now believe. The ease that you can apply the right-hand rule of electromagnetism to the rotational motion of planets says to me one thing. The cause of the rotation of the planets is the force caused by electrical flow of some kind around the planet similar to that of an electromagnet, most likely at its core. This electrical flow in turn causes the planets to have a magnetic fields with a north and south pole. We can further back this claim up by making some observations that generally there is some sort of relationship between the rotational speed of the planet and the strength of its magnetic field. Mercury has an electric field only 1% the strength of Earth's, and its day cycle is 58 times that of ours in length. And Jupiter's magnetic field is 10 times as strong as the Earth's, and its day length is approximately 10 hours. Venus doesn't have a magnetic field of its own at all. Really what it has is induced by the sun, and its day length is extremely long, longer than Mercury. It's about 100 days long actually. Now Mars is the exception to that rule. Mars only has half a magnetic field on its south side, and its day length is really similar to ours, almost the same. Now there's a reason for this, and I'll get into it later, but to hint, in the last video, the first video that I did on the electric universe, I cited a video that hinted that Mars underwent an extremely catastrophic process, and that catastrophic process destroyed its magnetic field. But that seems to suggest that it once did have a magnetic field, and the electric dynamo inside Mars once propelled its rotational force to make a similar day rotation as our own. But in general, the rotational motion of planets is caused by electromagnets inside them, being fed by some sort of electric current. And we can always find the north pole of any planet by using the right-hand rule. Well, that wasn't too bad, was it? You know, I know it's a lot to take in, but you guys did so great. Let's take a breather, a little break, and go on to the Google Moon site and take a look at the pretty moon. It has a lot of craters on there, and you can spin it around really fast. It's really fun. In my last video, I showed that the north and south poles of the moon had more craters and bigger craters than anywhere else on its surface, and I stated that this was evidence that electrical machining was responsible for the craters on the moon and not asteroid impacts. That's because the current would have been strongest at the north and south poles. But one of my watchers responded, scolding me that you could do a 1-minute search on Wikipedia to find that the moon didn't have magnetic poles and that it didn't have much of a magnetic field at all. You know, I'm actually open to criticism and the possibility that I'm totally wrong about this whole electric universe thing. So I went back and did some research, bracing myself for the moment that I would be refuted forever. This whole video series would be squashed, ruined, kabamboozled. But it turns out we were both right. You see, the moon does not have a magnetic field of its own, but scientists think that it did a long time ago, and they even theorize that its magnetic field was even stronger than the Earth's. If the moon did have a magnetic field once, and it does not now, then this is the key that we need to solve the mystery that the moon shows us only one side. Not only that, we get a fantastic story of what happened to the moon that changed everything about it. Let's review what we know about the moon, shall we? 1. The moon does not have a polar magnetic field. 2. The moon does not rotate around its axis, but instead only one side of it shows itself to the Earth. 3. The craters at the North Pole and the South Pole of the moon are greater in density and intensity than anywhere else on its surface. And 4. Scientists believe that at one point in time, the moon did have a strong magnetic field, but then it lost it. So, let's run with the theory that the craters of the moon were caused by electrical machining and not asteroid impacts. Let's also go with the theory that the rotational motions of the planets are caused by electromagnets, and the currents supplying those electromagnets are entering our planets at the North Pole and leaving our planets at the South Pole. This would indicate that if the craters on the moon were caused by electrical machining instead of asteroid impacts, the effects of the electromachining would be greater at the north and south poles than anywhere else on the moon's surface. So some planetary body within our solar system supplied the moon with a really intense electrical charge, and that electrical charge caused the machining through electrical arcs at the surface of the moon, and the effects were most intense at the north and south poles. And while you can see for your own eyes that the damage done at the north and south poles are much greater than anywhere on its surface, you could argue that the damage done to the electromagnetic circuitry inside the moon was much, much worse. The overload of electrical current caused by this event was too much for its electromagnet to handle, and it burned up. This is sort of like if you plug too many hair dryers into the same outlet in your bathroom and it's too much for that side of your house to handle. You know, one of two things happen when you try to use too much power in that way, right? Like if your house has a fuse box with actual fuses in them, when you use too much power, the fuse blows and breaks the circuit, so a current won't flow. And so you can't use your hairdryer anymore until you replace it. This is what we call an open circuit. But if your house has a breaker box with electrical switches instead, basically too much power flips those switches and opens the circuit, and you can't use your hairdryer anymore until you close the circuit again. It's the same thing really. I mean, your fuse box and your circuit breaker box are basically the same thing. They open the electrical circuits when too much power is applied, so your house doesn't burn up. That's what happened to the moon, really. It got too close to a massively charged object in our solar system and got overloaded, and the electrical circuit inside of it burned up and opened the circuit. There's no electricity flowing through the moon, powering an electromagnet inside of it. So the moon doesn't have a magnetic field anymore. No one knows what planetary body short-circuited our moon. But right now, the odd one out is my suspect. I'm looking at you, planet Venus. You look guilty as hell. So the moon has no magnetic field, which means its motions are dictated strictly by gravity now. In the first part of this video, we stated that gravity was caused by electric dipoles of some sort facing the same direction, mainly positive side down to the center of the Earth and negative side up. All of the relatively small objects on Earth, because of Earth's extremely massive size in comparison to us, have that same dipole configuration. The simple explanation then of why the moon's face is always turned towards the Earth is that because of its relatively smaller size in comparison to Earth, some of its dipole configurations, not all, but some of them also point to the center of the Earth, and the positive side of that dipole configuration is the face of the moon, while the negative side is in the back. This is kind of like that toy where the ball is weighted to one side, so it doesn't really matter how you roll it or push it, it will always end up on its heavier side down. Well, in the same way, we will never see the other side of the moon from here. Ever, really, because of the same principle. So that's it. That's all I've got. That's my explanation of that little question right there. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I will be making more of these in the future. So thank you. I will see you guys next time.